until 6 months before the presidential election. I mean, I think we spend entirely too much angst and time and worry and print on it when we should be worrying about the real problems in front of us, which goes to the other major point. The biggest problem in Washington is we fix symptoms of problems rather than problems. And that's why you see that report with all that duplication. They're not fixing the real problem, they're fixing the symptoms. And what we need, and as a doctor I was trained to identify what the real disease is, not treat the symptoms, because if I treat the symptoms I cover up what the real disease is. And we do that routinely up here, and we have to change that. And what we need is a heartfelt leader who understands that there's a commitment to help those that are less within the confines of the enumerated power, and a leader who will tell us the truth about the very real problems we face and bring us together. You know, the thing that I notice about America is when we all get the idea that we're under threat and everybody knows it, we come together. All of a sudden, think about 9/11. That's the last time the nation was really together. I will tell you that the threat we're facing today in terms of our budget, finance, and interest costs is a far greater threat than that ever was. And if our leaders will communicate that, the American people will come together and we'll actually solve the problem.
Anybody on the GOP side represent all those qualities that you just named?
I don't have any comment there.
Okay. All right, we'll move on. Bob,
okay.
An independent in Petersburg, Virginia. Go ahead, Bob.
My old hometown. I used to live in Petersburg.
Good morning.
Good morning. I love that accent.
Yeah. You know, I've heard a couple things you said I like, you know, especially about the flat tax and everything. But I think I also heard you say that this country, you know, that the government has kind of doubled in the last 10 years, and you know, 8 years of that was under the Bush administration.
No, I don't blame that on it. You know, both parties. Look,
right.
there's no partisanship with me in terms of the incompetence of increasing the spending in this country.
Well, you know, you were just talking about a person you'd like to see up there that you know was you know all the things you said, and I think Obama fitted most of those descriptions you was talking about.
Senator?
Well, you know, I don't think I think with the budget he put out, he totally failed to communicate to American people the problems that we have. His budget doubles our debt from $13.8 trillion at the time it was offered to $27 trillion in 10 years. I love him personally as a friend and as a man. He has done more to harm small business and medium-sized business. There's more regulations been put out by the Obama administration from the bureaucracy in the first 2 years of his presidency than in 8 years of Bush and 8 years of Clinton. He's already achieved more regulations that will impede growth and business activity in this country in 2 years than both those administrations did over 16. So although I love him, there's a lot of places where I disagree with him.
On the deficit and debts, this person tweets in, what's wrong with collecting what we're owed before making cuts to the poor? Offshore banking and tax loopholes equals billions.
There's no cuts to the poor. You know, first of all, that's the inflammatory words that we get. We have a safety net in this country that is phenomenal. You know, if you look at, I would tell whoever wrote that, they ought to read a book called The Tragedy of American Compassion, and what we've done to ourselves by keeping people down through our safety nets rather than lifting people up. But if you would read that book and then email me, I'd love to have a personal discussion with you about how best to help those that need our help, because we're not doing it today.
All right. Clarksville, Tennessee. George, a Republican.
Yes, hello. I was wondering if the senator could tell me, my memory's not really all that good, but how long did the Democrats have control of the Congress, total control, while President Bush was the president?
Gosh.
Well, they took over in 2006.
Yeah, so 2 years.
4 years, because they lost in 2010.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So when they blame President Bush for a lot of these problems, I guess they can also probably blame themselves. And was the president also in that Congress?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Look, I think you make a point that it may be factually correct, but doesn't help us. You know, again, I would just say when we're pointing fingers, the entire Congress, both Republican and Democrat, is guilty of not doing a great job, of not thinking in the long term, thinking in the short term, thinking in the parochial, in other words, the state. You know, when we take our oath, the oath doesn't mention your state. You're a congressman for the United States to do the best thing for the United States, not the best thing for your state. And when the parochial oversteps the national, and when the short term oversteps the long term, what we're doing is we're cheating the American people out of the representation that they deserve.
Bronx, New York. Ida is a Democrat. Good morning. You're on the air with Senator Tom Coburn, Republican of Oklahoma.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Greta, I would appreciate at some future time if you would put up on the screen what the taxes are for other countries and relative to ours. But what I really I agree with you. I'm a Democrat, but I think what you're saying today is really right on, and so I'm not trying. You know, but you blame the taxes for the corporations as a reason for their going outside of the United States.
I think let's talk for a minute about what are the taxes on American corporations. We're the only country in the world that has a worldwide tax system. So if you pay money, if you have a plant in Germany and you pay money in Germany to the German government for the taxes there, if you want to bring the net profit home after that, then we're going to charge you taxes on it. So what happens is the taxes never come home. They leave the money over there. They invest the money in a new plant over there rather than building a plant here. Otherwise, they have to pay 25%, at a minimum 35% most of the time, on the money they bring home. So they can have 1/3 more money to invest and grow their business by not ever bringing the money home. That's number one. Number two is if you look at just rates, corporate rates, there's only one country in the world that has a higher corporate tax rate than we do. Only one. And so it sounds like I'm defending corporations. What I'm defending is we want capital to go where it will benefit us the most. And when we have policies that say don't bring your money home because we're going to tax it differently than anybody else in the world does, and there consequently that money stays over there. Think of all the American companies that invested in China who are not bringing the profits home from China but rather reinvest it in China. Whereas if they could bring it home without a tax, we might not get all of it invested here, but we would certainly get a lot more. And what we want to be is a capital sink. We want people to put capital into America. That's how we're going to create jobs. That's how we're going to change this unemployment situation. We have a jobless recovery essentially right now because of productivity and efficiency, but also because of our tax system.
Let me go back to Ida. Are you still on the line, Ida?
Please.
Go ahead.
I suggest. All right, then I don't understand that. I mean, you know, that's much more complex than just lowering corporate taxes. That has to do with a lot of other stuff that I could not talk about. But I suggest that this tax business that you're talking about is merely one of the reasons the corporations leave this country and work elsewhere, or one of the reasons we lose some of the money of the corps. I think the less labor costs, the less regulations are just as important. I'd love to know how you would figure how yours and your the 5 other guys would prorate the different things like inefficiencies, effectiveness, regulations.
All right, let's get an answer, Ida.
Well, first of all, the best way to prorate anything is to look at the U.S. Constitution. And you measure all these programs, is it within the enumerated power of the U.S. Constitution that the federal government do this? I think a case can be made that it's not going to be long if the federal government keeps growing, that we don't need states anymore because we've preempted every issue in every area that the states basically control. And there's very few things that the states can do now without a federal government thumbprint and a bunch of rules and regulations about what they will and won't do. Our founders never intended that. And so what you do is you judge all those programs, whether it be duplication or regulation. Is this a role of the federal government? Is it constitutional? You know, the problem with the health care bill, it's not the health care bill. We have the largest expansion of the Commerce Clause ever. which says that the federal government now has the ability to tell you what to do with your personal life in terms of what you'll buy and what you won't. Well, if you say if that's within the bounds of the Commerce Clause, there's not anything the federal government can't tell you to do as a U.S. citizen. And that's why the health care bill is dangerous, is because of this massive expansion that says, and what I think we need is we need more local control, more local decisions, more state decisions, and fewer federal decisions. And on things that are truly national in scope, we ought to weigh in. When they're not, we ought to leave that to the states and cities and counties and municipalities to decide for themselves. And if we will do that, we will find tons of billions of dollars of efficiency. You know, it's like education. I'm criticized often because I don't think the Constitution, matter of fact, Thomas Jefferson didn't think the Constitution, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson didn't think the Constitution gave any role for the federal government in terms of education. I think the money that we're sending to the states, we ought to say, here's the money, rules are off, you all decide how you're going to educate your children, because one of our biggest difficulties in competing in the future is, do we have an educated, competitive workforce? And education is lower at every level than it was when we first started a federal role into education. So I would put forward that we've not done a good job, not that our intentions are bad, and not that we don't have good intention, but what we've done hadn't worked. So let's put it down to the people who can actually know and care the most, which is the local school boards in the state, about how we educate our kids. And that's just one example. And for the same amount of dollars, we'll get a whole lot more value if it runs only through the state or the local community, rather than running from bureaucrats in Washington who've never taught a child a thing and really don't care about whether your child succeeds or not.
The senator is referencing a new GAO report. There were stories in the papers yesterday, more stories today. The senator requested the report from the GAO looking at overlapping and duplicative initiatives across the federal government, 100 different surface transportation programs, 80 different financial literacy programs, etc. We're linking to this report on our website, cspan.org, and the lead author of this report will be our guest on Monday from 9:15 to 10, so we'll dig into this report with a little more detail on Monday. Let's go to Miramar Beach, Florida, an independent caller. Go ahead, you're on the air.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much.
Good morning.
Morning. On the corporate tax thing, of the 100 top companies in the United States, corporations in the United States, 83 of them pay zero in taxes. We have one company that has no bid contracts with our government.
Yeah.
That's not even a United States company anymore. Halliburton moved to Bahrain, and we're letting all our money go out. Y'all are still backing the corporations that are taking the money out of the United States. They give all the tax deductions to the big corporations saying research, development, yada, yada, yada. Then give them over $10 billion in credits.
Oh, it's much greater than that. First of all, who is you all, number one. Number two is we're trying to fix that. There's a $1.3 trillion in tax expenditures in the tax code. We're trying to take that away. That's why you see those low effective tax rates. The fact is we think everybody ought to pay their fair share. But we have such a complicated tax code because people have put in all these things through the years to help certain industries or help certain areas. We need to let the money flow where it will, and let's give everybody here's your rate. You know, and everybody pay their fair share. So when you say you all, that's an indictment of Congress, me, I don't know who that is.
Well, when you say we, who are you referring to?
I'm talking to those people who are trying to solve the problems of this country's finances.
The Gang of Six.
The Gang of Six.
All right. Moline, Illinois. Mary, Republican, go ahead.
Yes, good morning. I'm a voter, a taxpayer, and a retiree from the private sector. And, Senator, I have a little confidence in the Gang of Six. I've called Senator Durbin's office many times the last 2 years trying to get him to not spend any more money, and I didn't have much luck. And number two, you had a previous caller who was complaining about not having a cost of living. Well, we in the private sector, pensioners, we haven't had cost of living for years. So, you know, there's a lot of people that don't want to have any skin in the game, and that's my comment this morning.
Well, was she from Illinois?
Moline, yep.
Moline. I can't answer to why you haven't heard back from Senator Durbin. I can tell you that I don't get a chance to call a lot of Oklahomans back, but I do read every letter that comes into my office, which it takes 3 to 4 hours a day at night.
Emails too? Emails
and letters. I think what she hit on is a real important point. She didn't have any confidence. I don't know why they would have confidence in light of this report. We have to earn that confidence by making and doing the hard choices and being truthful about what's in front of us. There is a crisis of confidence in our country. One of the reasons the economic rebound is less is because people aren't confident about the future. And that's one of my criticisms of the president. You know, he needs to lead in terms of talking about the problem so people can have confidence. Number one, we've identified what the real problem is, and here's a way to get out of it. That's why I was so disappointed in his budget, because his budget totally ignored the realities that we face. And actually, if you look at his budget, in the first 3 years, he adds $3.4 trillion worth of debt. And then he says we save $1 trillion by freezing spending. The interest cost alone on just the first 3 years of deficit will chew up every bit of his savings plus another $400 billion. So actually his budget puts us in a worse hole than what we are right now if we didn't have a budget at all. So again, we have to restore confidence by talking truthfully and bluntly with the American people, but also giving them hope, because the thing that I liked about this last year in our country is that I don't care if they're conservative or liberal, people are starting to get engaged in their federal government. And what I find is true is Americans are a lot smarter outside of Washington than the Americans that are here, because they're loaded with common sense and a life schooled by hard knocks. And when they get involved, they're going to be able to change this place. And I would want everybody to know that if you get involved, you can have an impact. Maybe they don't call you back, but your message gets received.
The Senate's going to vote today on that continuing resolution for 2 weeks, extending it, $4 billion in cuts. Are you voting yes or no?
I haven't decided yet. I'm gonna talk on the floor as soon as I leave here at 9:40. I'm going to be on the floor to discuss the issues.
Okay. Well, our viewers can turn into C-SPAN too and watch you there. Thanks, Senator. As
You're welcome.
always, coming to the Washington Journal. Coming up next, we're going to return to the House and talk to Congressman Shaka Fattah.